Welcome back to this episode. I am so excited to be here with you today and talking about how we have a healthy relationship after a toxic one. So maybe you have left something that was not good, didn't feel good. You recognize what it was. You're in your healing process. Maybe you're starting to try to date again, or you're just trying to wrap your head around how the hell you have a healthy relationship, what that even means, what you need in order for that to feel good and healthy and be totally different than anything that you've experienced before. In my own experience, and the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is because I left a toxic relationship. Well, first I had to understand I was in a toxic relationship, have the courage to leave, heal through the post-separation abuse that happened, and then make sense of it all. And now I'm in a healthy relationship. And the relationship that I'm in now is one that the past me would have rolled her eyes and been like, that doesn't exist. It is respectful. We have healthy communication. It's baseline level of love. It's not manipulating. There's no gaslighting. There's no feeling like I can't speak up or speak my needs, tell him how I'm feeling. It's safe. And I want so badly every woman to experience this. Every woman to believe that they don't have to settle, to believe that they can leave something that isn't feeling good or isn't meeting their needs or isn't aligned, because there is something better out there. Getting out of that scarcity mindset of this is the best I'll ever get. And when you've been in toxic relationships, especially the ones that, where you've been manipulated or gaslit, it's hard to believe that. It's hard to believe that you're not too much or too emotional, or that anyone else would want you, especially if you're being told otherwise. But I want you to hear this from me now, that healthy love is possible. And it's possible when you are awake to your patterns and the other person is awake to their patterns, and there's communication around the little things that come up, because we're never going to be in a relationship that doesn't have bumpy moments, because it's inherently two people trying to bring all of their beliefs and their baggage and their shit and their past experiences into something. And there's going to be moments where you disagree or where you accidentally hurt the other person's feelings. And we want there to be space for that repair. So the rupture in the relationship that happens, and then you to come back and it be safe to communicate and repair and create that even stronger foundation. So there are some vital elements that go into having a healthy relationship. And we're going to talk about those in this episode today. So many of my clients come back to me and are like, Bree, yeah, leaving the toxic relationship was really hard. But this first healthy one is putting me to the test. This is the real work, because this is the opportunity where you have to choose different. When there is something that you need to say, it's your opportunity to say it in a healthy way and experience what it is to be received in your truth and be respected for it. So we're working on changing your default patterning, but how do you actually put that into practice? And what are the elements that you need to have a healthy relationship? So we're going to talk about a couple of things today. Rebuilding your self-worth being the first, because the other elements can't even happen if we don't have a baseline understanding of who we are and why we are important to protect, to make the time for. The next one is knowing how to set healthy boundaries, changing your nervous system set point, building compassion for your inner child, and communicating healthfully. So we're going to go through why each of these things are important to have a healthy relationship. And I want to start by talking about what a toxic relationship even is. I use the word toxic in these episodes, in my marketing, in my story. And to me, relationships are on a spectrum. So on one end, we have healthy, we have safe. On the other end, we have toxic. And so toxic to me, in its simplest definition, is an intense and dysfunctional relationship where confusion and hopelessness are more present than love and happiness. We're talking about the baseline energy, the baseline experience of the relationship. If most of the time you're feeling anxious and confused and hopeless and like everything is your fault and you're walking on eggshells because you are afraid, there's a lot of fear more of the time than there's love and safety and happiness, something is off. Something is not the way that it should be in a relationship that you're choosing to spend 90% of your time with this person. So in healthy relationships, you will have moments of confusion and moments of being afraid of speaking up, but it's not the baseline. So a toxic relationship, and what we're going to talk about in a lot of ways when I use that term, is this more extreme version of confusion and hopelessness. So when you've been in something like that, your self-worth is challenged. So oftentimes this was true for me, and this is true for a lot of my clients. Before they met the toxic person that created more of the toxic dynamic, they felt, pretty confident, pretty strong. Usually they are in a high-powered job. They have some sort of, they have their shit together, more or less. And as the relationship went on, they felt themselves feel more anxious. They felt themselves second guess everything, every decision, from what to wear in the morning to how to say I'm sorry, how to say thank you, like just everything. And weren't sure what they liked anymore, weren't sure really who they were. And something that happens when you leave a toxic relationship is you feel like this shell of a person that you used to be. And so how do you get that back? How do you find yourself again? I created a self-guided course literally called Find Yourself Again, because I came up against this with all of my clients and myself, where it's like, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know anything about what I like to do, because so much of my energy, so much of my mental preoccupation has been going towards this relationship. And now that I don't have that to worry about or figure out or spend my time on, I don't know what I like. I don't know who I am. So I'll link to that in the episode notes if you want to be guided through that process. But in essence, what I'm helping you do there is really identify your values, your needs, and your wants in that order. So I talk about a filter system and why it's important to identify your values first and use that as the filter when you're bringing new people into your space. Because if you aren't sharing values, you're gonna butt heads, because values help us to identify the way we spend our time, the way we orient our life. So I'll give you an example. One of my values is health. And part of how I express that value is I like to hike, I like to exercise, I like to go grocery shopping and cook healthy meals. And my ex-partner did not value that. So the way he spent a lot of his free time was not in those ways. So it was inherently already like frustrating because we couldn't spend time together in the ways that felt fulfilling to either one of us. And he wanted to eat out more. He wanted to spend money on food that wasn't healthy. And it contradicted a lot of what I believed in. And at the time, I didn't have the language to be like, oh my God, we don't have we don't have values that are compatible. But I felt it. I felt the misalignment. I felt the unfulfillment. So when you're choosing people to be in your life, it's going to make the experience more easeful if you're choosing people who are aligned with your values or have similar values. Maybe if my value is health and the way I express it is through hiking and the way he expresses it is through rock climbing, which is true of my relationship now, it's not necessarily the exact same thing. We don't have to do the exact same thing all of the time together, but we're aligned in those values. So it makes it like you're moving downstream together instead of trying to swim upstream against these values and then hitting the rapid and then hitting the rock. And it makes everything harder. So identifying your values and then identifying your needs. So what do you actually need in a relationship? And getting past this block that so many of us have of like, I don't have needs. I don't want to be needy. And it's like, okay, you're human and all humans have needs. Let's just start baseline there. And for women, especially, it's an uphill battle to believe that our needs are important, because if you look back on our history, our ancestry, like women's needs came second. We put ourselves behind the needs of the husband and the children. And this is just changing in our pretty recent past. So connecting with yourself, validating yourself in that you have needs, and that is important. So if you have a need to have kids, you probably want to find somebody who also can meet that need, who also wants kids. And this can even go down to, I have a need for quality time because that's my love language. And if the person that I'm with doesn't have that love language, can they learn it? Are they willing to practice and to show up in the ways that I need, and I can show up in the ways they need? But really being able to articulate what that is, because otherwise we're hoping that our partner can read our mind, and that sets everyone up for a bad time. Also in this needs category is identifying your non-negotiables. So a lot of times people will DM me on Instagram and be like, what are the red flags? What should I look out for? And of course, there are some glaring red flags, and I have videos about red flags. I have content about red flags, but what are your unique non-negotiables? What are your red flags? And you spending some time thinking about this is really important when you are not in the energy of someone else. So making these lists before you're dating or before you're in a relationship, so that you're not conforming the list into the person. Okay. Having the list as like your backboard to be able to use when you're meeting new people of like, is this working? And for you to be able to articulate these things to them. And then the third filter is wants. So this is sometimes where we find ourselves in a pickle because we're choosing people based on what we want. We want the hot sex. We want the nice car. We want to go on an expensive vacation. We want them to be charismatic and be able to, walk into a room and people know who they are. Whatever it is that you want, we're choosing those people. And then we have a hot couple of months, and then real things start coming up. We start realizing we don't have anything to talk about. We start realizing that we're kind of just in this for the physical piece, whatever it is. And we wonder why we feel so unfulfilled. So the filter system helps you identify how to start to bring people into your life and to give you the language around when someone asks you, what do you like to do? I know for me, I hated that question. I hated it so much because I didn't take the time to figure that out. I just sort of chameleoned into the person I was with or the friend group that I was with. And it was like, I'll just be whatever you are, because then you'll accept me and love me and choose me, right? Those were the driving forces for me. It was not me taking time to be like, this is who I am. And if we don't align, cool, I'm going to go find someone else to hang out with or someone else to date. So taking that time, it builds your confidence because it shows you, first of all, how cool you are. And because your coolness might not be the same as someone else's coolness doesn't mean that one is better than the other. So not being this like Gumby, this Gumby character that just molds to whoever they're with, having a strong sense of self and feeling conviction around that person, feeling respect, feeling confident. This is how we start to rebuild that self-worth, is really identifying these things. So once you have the self-worth, once you're on the trajectory of building confidence, we have to start setting boundaries, because also people who have low self-worth don't have boundaries because they don't want to upset people. They don't believe that their needs matter, and they just people please. They conform, they're malleable. I'm guilty of this. I'm speaking again from experience. So I want to share with you a quote from Glennon Doyle. If you don't know Glennon Doyle, go look her up. She has an amazing podcast. She has wonderful books. And she says that nice people can have boundaries, and boundaried people can be nice. And in fact, in my opinion, boundaries are the kindest thing that we can do in a relationship, because my boundary protects me, and it protects me from resenting you, which protects the entire relationship, because then I'm not going to explode later. So boundaries are, and these are also Glennon Doyle's words, they're an expression of an expression of needs and expectations that are necessary for you to feel safe and supported. So they're just needs that you have in order to feel safe and supported. And I would even put in there loved. What do I need in this dynamic to feel safe, supported, or loved? And if I'm not feeling those things, I need to do something to make that more safe, feel more supported and more loved. I need to request something, and I need to set a boundary around something. So the first baseline, prereq to setting a boundary, is to believe that you deserve to have your needs met. You deserve to feel safe, supported, and loved. And holding yourself true to your non-negotiables, those unique red flags. So what boundaries are, and sometimes where we get confused in setting boundaries, because I hear clients come back to me and they're like, my boundaries don't work. And I'm like, what do you mean they don't work? Your boundaries are entirely in your control. So there's a difference and a discrepancy here between boundaries and a request. Requests are not always, accepted by the other person. So let's say, I'll give you an example. I learn best by examples. So you'll learn I do a lot of metaphors and a lot of examples. If you have a need to not be yelled at in a discussion with your partner because it makes you feel unsafe, and you are in a dynamic where there's yelling that happens, the boundary would be, if you continue yelling, I will leave this conversation. Not, please stop yelling at me. Please stop yelling at me is a request, which likely if they're yelling at you, they're not going to hear you anyway. So the boundary is you saying, if you continue this behavior, this is what I'm going to do, which is all in your control, because it's not dependent on whether he stops or does or doesn't. You're not trying to manipulate or give him an ultimatum. And I speak very generally in heterosexual dynamics. So it could be a woman who's doing this, but for sake of ease of talk, I'm going to use the man as the one who is yelling, and using that as, this is happening, I'm going to leave. But the kicker, or the piece that makes a boundary is you following through with that. Because if he starts yelling and you say, if you continue yelling, I'm going to leave this conversation, but you don't leave the conversation, then it's not a boundary. There's no follow through. There's no protection for yourself, which leaves you feeling unsafe and unsupported in that situation. So I'm going to do a whole episode on boundaries because there's so much that we can talk about. But know that boundaries are a way that you protect yourself, a way that you get your needs met, They're not a way for you to manipulate other people or try to force them to do something that they don't want to do. Your boundary might not be what the other person wants to hear. It might upset the other person. And that's for them to hold and figure out. Other people's feelings, other people's reactions are not yours. They're responsible for feeling that and communicating to you what they need based on what you need. So again, we're going to go into a whole episode on that because there's so much we can talk about with boundaries, but your needs matter. Speaking your needs it takes practice, especially if you have gone 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years without ever speaking your needs. It's going to feel uncomfortable and you're going to be afraid of upsetting the other person and you're going to get sweaty and panic and then set the boundary and then have to throw your phone to the other side of the room so that you don't pick it up and say, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it. It's a whole thing. And just know it's practice, just like anything else. So once you have your self-worth more identified, more rebuilt, you can set the boundaries around who you are and what you need. And the nervous system is another vital element, this nervous system set point, because a lot of us who have been in childhoods where there was a lot going on, so say there was a lot of chaos, and chaos can look different. It can look like health issues. It can look like addiction. It can look like being in a house where you weren't sure if you were going to get food or you were going to have enough money. There's a lot of different ways that we feel chaos. So when you grow up in something like that, it's your baseline. Your nervous system is most familiar with hypervigilance, panic, worry, maybe anger, right? You're in this heightened nervous system response because your environment wasn't safe. So our nervous system is activated to go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn when we don't feel safe. So if you grew up in something inherently in chaos, there's unpredictability. And in unpredictability, we feel unsafe. So Kate Northrup is a coach and a speaker, and she explains the nervous system in terms of a thermostat, which I thought was a brilliant metaphor. So if you think about a thermostat, okay, we're at 70 degrees. This is where we're most comfortable. If my 70 degrees is chaos, whenever I go above or below that, mostly below that, I'm going to do something to bring it back up because down here feels weird. This calm, peaceful place feels strange. That's why when we get into the first healthy relationship, we can be a little bit bored, to put it bluntly. It's like, I don't have to be preoccupied thinking about if he's going to text me back because he always does. I don't have to try to find him in a lie because he's always telling me the truth. I don't have to sniff out alcohol in his breath because he doesn't have a problem. You know, it's like we are so used to the heightened nervous system response that when it starts to feel peaceful, we're like, I'm going to do something to stir some shit up. I'm going to pick a fight about the dishwasher. I'm going to, whatever you're going to do to make a little bit of excitement. And excitement meaning panic or conflict or something that equals your baseline. So we want to start to work with the nervous system to really expand your capacity to sit in discomfort. Because when you go below into this peaceful place, it's a little discomfort, you know, at the beginning. And if you can't sit with that and expand your capacity to be in that, you're going to keep bringing things up. You're going to push away healthy people, or you're going to just go find an unhealthy person that has also a baseline for chaos. So discomfort doesn't always mean something bad. It just means something unfamiliar. So in this case, the discomfort is the peaceful relationship. It's the trust, it's the safety, because that's not familiar. Sometimes it is the discomfort of speaking a boundary and upsetting the other person, or having to feel your feelings, that having to feel anger or sadness, if you've been really blocked and really numb and really sort of like, I'm fine. Like that is the codependency tagline, is I'm fine, because we don't have language for what we're feeling, because it wasn't safe to look inward to see how are we feeling. It's like, how's everyone else feeling? I know how everyone else is feeling. So expanding the capacity so that you're not self-sabotaging, you're not bringing yourself back up to this unhealthy thermostat level. We want to expand the nervous system and really tone the nervous system so that your baseline normal is now safety and support. Okay. And your ability to re-regulate is really important, because there will be moments that throw you out. And how do you bring yourself back? So I use a tool with my clients and myself personally all of the time called EFT tapping. It stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques. I have a whole EFT tapping tutorial video on my YouTube page if you're interested in learning a little bit more about it. And we're going to do further episodes on tapping as well. But in very simplistic terms, it's a tool. It's a somatic tool, body-based tool that helps to bring your stress response down. So when we get triggered, nervous system goes up and our amygdala is firing. Our amygdala is our security camera of our life. It's constantly scanning. This is the reptilian brain, the very first brain to come online when we were, cavemen or earlier, because our survival was dependent on that. So our reptilian brain is really stuck in those 4 trauma responses: the freeze, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. 4 options is not a lot of options. So when you get triggered and you only have access to that brain, you're doing your habitual patterns. Your body's reacting to this trauma response or to this heightened state. And then you choose the trauma response that chooses the behavior that then reinforces that you're not safe. So what we want to do is, with tapping, you're literally activating different points on your body, on your face and your torso and your hands, as you're processing through what is present. And when we are activating these points on our body, it's sending the signal to the brain that the body is safe. So the body telling the brain that we're safe is a more direct way to believe that than us trying to convince our body that feels unsafe that we're safe. So we're using the body to signal that we're safe. We're also using the present. We're bringing light to what is true in this moment. So oftentimes we are feeling feelings that don't feel fun to feel, like anxiety and sadness and anger. And we've categorized these as bad, when really they're just dense, which is why when you feel sad or you feel angry, you feel heavy. It's like, sludgy, lethargy. Like it's not ideal. We don't like being in that space. But when we feel joy and happiness and excitement, it's lighter. We feel like we could conquer the world and do it all and love everybody. And it's just it's a different feeling in the body. But one is not better than the other. They're just different experiences. But what happens because of the way that we are conditioned is, when the dense emotions come in, we're like, ugh, I don't want to feel that. I'm going to push it away. I'm going to pretend like it doesn't matter. This pit in my stomach, I don't care about. Like, I'll just distract myself. I will drink, I'll eat, I'll have sex, I'll do something to get rid of it. What EFT helps us do is be able to be present and feel the quote unquote unsafe emotions safely. So if I can sit here and tap while I'm feeling anxiety, instead of running away from it, if I can be present with the thoughts in my head and the racing heart that I'm having, then it's going to allow that space and allow it to move. That's why EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques, because we want to move it. Emotions aren't meant to be stored in the body. They're meant to be experienced for like 90 seconds and then move through. That's why if you've ever allowed yourself to have like a big cry, like a ugly cry, afterwards you're like, oh my God, I feel so much better. It's like we need to move it. Crying is one way to move it. Yawning is one way to move it. Tapping is one way to move it. Physical movement is one way to move it. Like there's a lot of ways that we can move it, but we are so used to stuffing it down and packing it away. And if you haven't read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, please do, because it describes very beautifully how we store trauma in the body, what happens when we keep compressing feelings. If you've ever seen an animal in the wild, like after a fight, or maybe they were almost just eaten or something and they got away, they'll shake. Dogs do this too. They'll shake and they'll like literally shake it off, right? Like Taylor Swift says. And we don't do that. We don't move it that way. So the more we can get into that practice of being with what is and not tapping to make it go away, but tapping to help give it space in order to be felt fully, which then often leads to that feeling less. So taking you from the triggered state to a calm state with using it in a practitioner way with a practitioner. We can also use it to help go into some deeper places because you feel safe. So if you've ever been in a therapy session where like you're in like a little dissociative place, kind of a trauma response place, because what you're talking about is really hard to talk about or really shocking, something like that. And you get out of the session and you're like, I don't even remember anything we said. Or you're trying to like furiously take notes so that you don't forget, which already means you're in some sort of panic. What tapping helps you do is be able to feel safe while you're talking about these types of things. And there's a specific recipe that we do as a practitioner and client to help you move into those different trailheads and be able to explore a little bit about the root of what is causing the feeling. So it can be used in a couple different ways, but for you to have a tool to use in the literal moment that you're feeling anxiety, where you don't have to wait for the therapy session or the coaching session. It's like, okay, I know what to do to bring my nervous system back down. I know this is a familiar response because my little girl is scared. You know, you get very versed in these parts of you and what they're feeling and how it presents in your body. So reconnecting the brain and the body. Or another vital element after we are learning how to regulate the nervous system, it brings in the inner child. So this relationship with our inner child is so important, because if you think about your inner child like a real child, you have a child who is having a tantrum and they're screaming in the corner. If you ignore that child or yell at them or tell them they're being ridiculous or tell them that they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling, what is the child going to do? Most likely, it's going to yell louder and cry harder and feel even more unseen and more unloved and more unheard and more misunderstood, more neglected. So we think that when we have these feelings come up let's use this as a common one with my clients, they feel afraid that they're going to be alone forever. Say they left a toxic relationship, they haven't gotten into a healthy one yet, and they're like really fighting this urge to go back to the ex because he's familiar. It'll be a quick hit of chosenness, of connection, and then it leads to the spiral of not great things. But when you're in that panic place of, oh my God, I'm going to be alone forever, when you can see that as a part of you who's really afraid, that part of you who's throwing the tantrum, you can meet them with curiosity and compassion and say, oh, honey, come here. I know that you're really afraid. And I know your fears are really valid because something else happened to us when we were really young that really instilled this belief that we're going to be alone. And I see you, and I know this is so hard, and I'm here for you. What do you need? meeting yourself with that energy instead of like, oh, I'm fucking feeling this feeling again. And I'm too old to be feeling like I'm going to be alone. And it's so dismissive. Do you see that? So often we're wanting this love and connection and space and wanting to be heard from people, from our partner, but we're not even giving that to ourselves. So we're reinforcing this belief that we're not worth it. We're not worth the time. We're not worth the connection. If I don't even want to sit with myself, like nobody else is going to want to. So you really meet yourself differently. And there's so much healing that happens in that compassion moment when you meet them and you hear them, because as you get more familiar with your parts, it sounds wacky to talk to yourself and ask what parts of you, what they need, but you will get an answer. This part of you who's really afraid, like, what do you need? It's like, I need a hug. I need someone to fucking hold me and see me and not leave me in the corner. So this practice, it's a practice. It happens over and over because you will get triggered over and over. And the goal, again, is to not rid yourself of the trigger. The goal is to bring the trigger down so that every time that trigger comes up, it feels less like the world is going to end and more like, oh yeah, this is that part of me. She's 4, she's scared. I'm going to take a break and I'm going to sit with her for a couple of minutes. I'm going to tap. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to play a song and dance because that's what she wants to do, whatever. And give yourself that love. Because the more that you are healing your wounds, the more that you're tending to yourself internally, the less you're going to be seeking somebody to do that. And the less you're going to be seeking people to validate your limiting belief. If your limiting belief is that you're alone and everybody leaves, that's what your little girl feels. If you're unconscious of that, you're going to seek out people who validate that. You're going to seek out the man who cheats on you and leaves. You're going to seek out the man who's married and isn't available because you're not actually comfortable with an emotionally available person. So meeting yourself with compassion, healing that. And then when you're in a healthy relationship, your partner can help support you in that process, but they're not fixing the child. They're not healing the child for you. That's not their job. And it's not your job to heal their child. It's your job, again, to be a supportive partner in, I understand these triggers of yours. I understand your wounding, and I'm going to do everything in my power to not trigger you if I can help it. And if I do, you're responsible for sitting with them, and I'm responsible for holding space for you to do that or supporting you somehow in your process, listening, being there when you want to process through what happened, being the secondary support, not the primary for the little girl. Okay. So again, so much we can go into, and we will, about all of these things, but your inner child is your inner parts, your inner system is the most important relationship that you'll ever have, ever, hands down, ever. So building the trust, building the understanding, just like you would with an outside person, is going to really behoove you in every part of your life. Okay, the last element that we have is communication skills. So you have gotten more skilled at regulating your nervous system. You've taken time to sit with your parts when something happens. When you sit with your parts and you're tapping and you regulate the nervous system, you come into more of a neutral place where you have more access to all parts of your brain that can make sense of things, that, can problem solve, that can articulate. And then it's time to share what you need or what happened. And this is the interruption of the passive aggressive response to things. Or I'm just going to do it all because I don't know how to communicate what I need, and then I'm going to resent you for it later. So some ways that we can communicate, some ways that I like to teach communication with my clients, first and foremost, are I statements. So when something happens, instead of saying, you caused this, or you did this, or blaming the other person or talking in what are we going to do for dinner? What do we want to say back to this person? It's like using I statements because what you feel and understand and believe is important. So let's say that you guys had a conversation about your future and both of you were a little bit dysregulated and needed to take some space from that conversation because in that moment you were like, I don't know what's happening. So you take some time, you sit with your inner self, you regulate, and then you come to the understanding of like, oh my God, I'm really afraid of something when we talk about our future. I'm afraid of committing forever, let's say. So bringing that back and then being able to say, I'm feeling a lot of fear about commitment when we talk about our future, not because of you, but because of something in me. Can we talk about it? Or would you be open to helping me like talk through it or something? Instead of shutting down and not ever revisiting the conversation again, or instead of saying like, you're pushing me too hard for this future talk, stop and meeting it with anger. It's like, this is what I'm feeling. This is why, because you've taken the time to be introspective about it. Another way that you can use I statements is setting a boundary and speaking your need. So if you find yourself doing a lot, bending over, people pleasing, keeping the whole house intact, whatever you're doing, and you recognize like, oh my God, I just can't. And meeting it at the point before you explode is ideal. But saying, I have so much on my plate and I would love to talk to you about how we can switch up some of these chores so that I feel more resourced. Not saying, you're not doing enough and I always have to take care of everything in this house. And when are you going to help me? And when are you going to step up? And like, you see the difference of how the first option opens space for communication. The second option really puts somebody on the defense. So I statements. Another way that I use and I love to teach is to use the concept of the story that I'm making up, because we are always making up stories. Stories are how we make sense of things. If something happens, I need to create a story around why that happened so that I can understand it and deal with it. And the story is not always true. And likely it's a story based on your past traumas, your past wounding. So when something happens, let's say, for an example, you and your partner went out with your friends, and say they were more your friends than his friends. And during the dinner, you witness him, like he's on his phone, he's scrolling, he's a little bit like disconnected from conversation, not really engaged. And you, in that moment, made up the story of, my friends aren't important, I'm not important, this isn't going to work. Let's say that was a story. Do you see how that's the conclusion that you made about him scrolling on his phone? So instead of holding that in and believing that and living according to your story and often self-sabotaging to make that story true, what we want to do is be able to communicate about the story that you're making up. So when you've come to a neutral place, when you've identified the story, when you've sat with your inner child, being able to come to him and being like, hey, I made up a story last night when we were out with my friends. Can I share it with you? And assuming he says yes, saying, when you were scrolling on your phone during dinner, I really made up the story that my friends aren't important, I'm not important, and that you don't want to be in this relationship. Is that true? And asking, because it might be true, but it might not be true. And then allowing space for him to say whatever is true for him. And maybe that truth is something like, oh my gosh, no, like I had such an overwhelming day at work. Like I was really shutting down in the conversation. And I recognize that that's a reflex behavior that I do to numb when I'm feeling uncomfortable. And I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was going to come across that way. Do you see how your story wasn't truth and his story was his truth behind his behavior? So when we can communicate about the stories, then I'm not living over here and you're living over here thinking you didn't do anything. And then I'm getting resentful and angry that you don't realize that there's something we need to talk about. I'm laughing because I've done this so many times in past relationships where you're just so convinced that your story is true, but you don't have or I didn't have the courage or the language or the tool to bring it up in any sort of healthy way. So it's comical to me now about how ridiculous it is to both partners be living in different stories. But we do this, it's so common. It's so common. And if you're doing that, again, it's a practice of just recognizing, oh, I'm making sense of something that might not be true. Can I bring this to my partner? And in a healthy relationship, your partner wants to hear what's true for you. They love and respect you, and they want to know when you're not feeling good or when you're feeling good too. But like there is open space for communication for you to come and say, this isn't working, or my little girl is scared, or I need support from you. I need a hug, whatever you need. Whereas in toxic relationships, you might have been in an experience where that person used that against you, or that person, you tried to be vulnerable and they threw it all back at you later, or you tried to be vulnerable and they manipulated you, or they gaslit you, or it caused a fight. So much of being in a healthy relationship is trusting yourself first and foremost, that if you try to share the story that you're making up and it goes sideways, you're going to be okay no matter what, because you're going to be resourced enough to know what's happening, and holding the possibility that this person is not your ex. This person is more self-aware, is more emotionally available, loves me deeply, and isn't using this facade of love to try to get something from me. It's a lot of trust, and it's a lot of testing the water, testing the new boundaries, testing, sharing, and seeing how they react. And like, it's healing that past experience because you're experiencing something different. I remember the first time that my partner and we needed to have a conversation about something that wasn't a fight. And I don't even use that word in our describing our relationship now, because we just have conversations. It doesn't ever turn into yelling or the silent treatment or whatever. In going into that, expecting me to share what was true for me and him to react in some sort of way. And when he responded with, oh my God, tell me more, I was like, what? This is not how this is supposed to go. And it's diverting what we think is supposed to be in relationships into what is healthy. And if you haven't experienced something that's healthy, it's a lot of learning while doing. It's a lot of practicing and having support while you're doing that, because again, you're learning a new skill. Like if you think about like learning to drive, do you remember learning to drive and like having to have your hands at 10 and 2, like white knuckle grip on the steering wheel, full focus, no radio, no conversation, no eating, like there was nothing. You're like fully focused on blinker, move lane, because you're learning. And then now it's like I'm eating a granola bar, I'm listening, I'm singing along to music, I'm maybe having a conversation, like, and then you get somewhere and you're like, how did I get here? Because it's become so second nature. So we want to change the grooved pathways in your brain to go from where you've been to where the new, you're learning. It's picking up the sled, going to a new sledding route, leaving the one behind that's very grooved, very, very slippery, very easily accessible. And it takes a lot of work to pick up the sled and walk over, find a new path, set it down, groove the new route. So this is not a quick fix. This is not a listen to this podcast and be a different woman. This is all about bringing awareness to these places that you then need to bring awareness to and need to put intention around changing and healing. So if you need more support, I'm here. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing, is to help you wake up, to help you live and love differently than you ever have. So I always have a free session available for you to explore options, to talk about where you are, to get to know you, to have you have an hour of just somebody who fucking gets it. So the link is in the notes here for that. And then if this episode resonates for you, share it. Share it with a woman who is going through the same thing, because we all know somebody who is stuck with the shitty partners, who can't get out of it, who believes she's not enough, who's really trying to change and doesn't. Maybe she's getting stuck. Maybe she's just not in the right container or healing space, or has the right tools, but really wants it. So share this with somebody who you love, you love and want to have the support. I am so honored that you, if you're listening to this to the end, that you share this time with me. This podcast is one of my favorite things, and quality time, quality conversation, even though it's a conversation with myself, knowing that you're listening on the other side means so much to me. So thank you for being here, and I will see you on the next episode.